She was standing in the freezing sleet, 280 pounds of shattered heart and drenched clothes after her husband threw her out like trash for not fitting into his perfect image. Then a black SUV pulled up, and Houston's most dangerous man whispered, "Come with me." The sleet in Houston on a late November evening doesn't just fall, it bites. It slashes sideways, driven by a brutal wind off Lake Michigan, finding every seam in your clothing. But for 32-year-old Clara Jenkins, the biting cold of the weather was nothing compared to the ice she had just been subjected to inside her own home. She stood on the wet concrete of the driveway in Oak Park, her size 24 jeans instantly soaking through plastering uncomfortably against her heavy thighs. At 280 pounds, Clara took up space in a world that constantly demanded she shrink. For the past 7 years, no one had demanded that more ruthlessly than her husband, David Rossi. "I'm not doing this anymore. Clara, look at you." David's voice cut through the howling wind, sharp and dripping with disgust. He stood in the warm yellow glow of their porch light, shielded from the rain. Beside him stood Chloe, a 24-year-old Pilates instructor, with a waist the size of Clara's thigh, looking at Clara with a sickening cocktail of pity and triumph. "David, please." Clara begged, her voice, trembling, her thick arms wrapping around her torso, in a futile attempt to shield herself from the cold. "It's our anniversary. You can't just lock me out. Where am I supposed to go?" "I don't care where you go," David sneered, tossing a cheap, hastily packed duffel bag onto the wet lawn. It hit a puddle with a dull, heavy splash. "Go to a diner. Go to a buffet. That's all you care about, anyway. I'm a regional director now, Clara. I entertain clients. I host dinners. I can't have a wife who waddles into a room and breaks the patio furniture. You disgust me. You've let yourself go, and I am done drowning with you." The words hit her with physical force. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. It was true that she was fat. She had always been a bigger woman, but the massive weight gain had crept up on her during the marriage, a direct response to David's relentless emotional abuse. Food had become her only sanctuary, the only thing that didn't criticize her or tell her she was worthless. Every time he belittled her, she found solace in the quiet comfort of the pantry. She had cooked his meals, ironed his shirts, managed the finances that kept him out of bankruptcy early in his career, and loved him with a desperate, suffocating loyalty. And this was her reward. "Chloe is moving in," David stated flatly, placing a proprietary hand on the slim woman's lower back. "I'll have my lawyer send the divorce papers to your office. Don't come back here, Clara. I've already changed the alarm codes." The heavy oak door slammed shut. The deadbolt clicked. Clara stood frozen in the sleet for a long time. The street was quiet, the houses of their affluent suburban neighborhood securely locked against the storm. She could see the silhouette of Mrs. Gable next door, peeking through her blinds, watching the spectacle. Humiliation burned hot in Clara's chest, a suffocating weight that made her want to claw out of her own skin. With numb fingers, she walked over to the soggy duffel bag. It was too heavy, her joints aching as she hauled it over her shoulder. Every step down the sidewalk was an agony of chafing skin, freezing rain, and absolute crushing despair. She was 32, morbidly obese, abandoned, and entirely alone. She trudged 3 blocks to the bus stop on Cicero Avenue. The plexiglass shelter offered minimal protection. Clara collapsed onto the metal bench, the cold biting through her soaked cotton coat. She sat there, a heavy, drenched mass of misery, crying silently into her hands, the tears mixed with the freezing rain. She thought about walking into traffic. She thought about how easy it would be to just let the cold take her. Who would care? Her parents had passed away years ago. She had isolated herself from her friends because David hadn't liked them. Her entire existence had been reduced to a punching bag for a mid-level corporate narcissist. 45 minutes passed. Not a single bus came. The streetlights flickered, casting long, lonely shadows across the slick pavement. Clara shivered violently, her teeth chattering, her thick fingers turning a dangerous shade of blue. She closed her eyes, exhausted, feeling the sheer physical and emotional gravity of her life pressing her down into the concrete. Then the low, deep purr of a heavy engine cut through the sound of the storm. Clara didn't open her eyes at first, assuming it was a snowplow or a late-night delivery truck, but the sound didn't fade. It stopped right in front of her. She blinked through her wet, mascara-streaked eyelashes. A massive, jet-black Lincoln Navigator, its windows tinted so darkly they looked like obsidian, was idling at the curb. The sleek, dangerous-looking vehicle was completely out of place in this sleepy, storm-battered suburb. For a second, terror spiked through her. She clutched her wet bag. Was she about to be mugged? What could they possibly take from her? The heavy rear door swung open. A large man in a tailored dark suit and an earpiece stepped out, holding a massive black umbrella. He didn't look at Clara. Instead, he held the umbrella over the doorframe. A second man stepped out of the SUV. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a terrifyingly quiet grace. He wore a charcoal grey bespoke overcoat that probably cost more than Clara made in a year. His dark hair was lightly dusted with silver at the temples, and his face was a study in hard, chiseled lines, a strong jaw, a sharp Roman nose, and a pair of dark, piercing eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Clara stopped breathing. She knew that face. Not personally, but professionally. She was a senior forensic accountant for Grant Thornton, downtown. 3 weeks ago, she had been auditing the books of a sprawling logistics firm called Apex Hauling. She had found a massive discrepancy, millions of dollars moving through phantom shell companies. When she brought it to her boss, he had turned pale, snatched the file from her hands, and explicitly ordered her to bury it accidentally, letting the real owner's name slip in his panic. Arton Costello. He wasn't just a businessman. He was the head of the Costello Syndicate, a ruthless, deeply entrenched mafia organization that controlled the unions, the docks, and half the illicit cash flow in Houston. He was a ghost, a myth, a man who destroyed lives with the snap of his fingers. And he was standing in front of her at a bus stop in the freezing rain. Arton Costello did not flinch as the sleet hit the edges of the umbrella held by his bodyguard. He stood perfectly still, his dark eyes locked onto Clara. He took in her soaked hair, her blue lips, her trembling, heavy frame, and the pathetic, waterlogged duffel bag at her feet. There was no pity in his gaze. Clara hated pity. Pity was what cashiers gave her when she bought too much junk food. Pity was what her co-workers gave her when David called the office to yell at her. Arton's look was analytical, piercing, and strangely respectful. He took a step forward. Clara instinctively shrank back against the frozen plexiglass, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. "Mrs. Rossi." Arton's voice was a low, resonant baritone that carried effortlessly over the wind. It was smooth, but laced with an undeniable authority. "Or given the scene I just witnessed from the end of your street, should I call you Clara?" Clara's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her teeth chattered too violently. How long had he been watching? Why was the boss of the Houston Mafia sitting in a car on her street? Arton didn't wait for her to find her voice. He reached up, unbuttoned his heavy, incredibly soft cashmere overcoat, and slipped it off his shoulders. He stepped under the bus shelter and draped the coat around Clara's shaking broad shoulders. The fabric was heavy lined with silk and radiated his body heat. It smelled faintly of expensive cedarwood cologne and something metallic and sharp. Danger. Because of her size, standard coats rarely fit her, but Artan was a massively built man. The coat wrapped around her, instantly breaking the biting wind. I... Clara finally stammered, pulling the lapels closed with numb fingers. "What are you doing here? I don't believe in coincidences," Clara Artan said, pulling a silver cigarette case from his suit jacket. He lit a cigarette, the flare of the lighter illuminating the sharp angles of his face, and a thin, faded scar running along his jawline. "I've been having my people keep an eye on you since you flagged the anomalies in the apex hauling ledger." Clara's blood ran cold, colder than the sleet. He was here to kill her. Of course he was. She knew too much. David had thrown her out just in time for her to be murdered at a bus stop. "Please," she choked out, fresh tears welling up. "I didn't tell anyone except my boss. I deleted the files. I swear to God I won't say a word. Just let me go." Artan frowned, a deep crease appearing between his brows. He looked genuinely irritated, not at her, but at the situation. "Do I look like a thug who shoots accountants in the street? If I wanted you dead, Clara, you would have died quietly in your sleep 3 weeks ago." The bluntness of his statement made her gasp, but paradoxically, it eased her immediate panic. "Your boss is an idiot," Artan continued, taking a slow drag of his cigarette. "But you are a savant. My own financial architects spent 6 months building that laundering route. They assured me it was invisible to the IRS, the FBI, and every major auditing firm. You dismantled it in 4 days, on a Tuesday, alone." He looked down at her, his dark eyes intense. "I don't destroy assets, Clara. I acquire them. I came here tonight to make you a job offer. I needed a private off-the-books conversation. What I didn't expect was to watch a mediocre middle management nobody toss a brilliant woman into the freezing rain like a piece of garbage." Clara looked away, shame flushing her cheeks hotly. "He's right, though," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "Look at me. I'm a mess. I'm fat. I'm useless, and I have nothing." Artan stepped closer. He didn't reach out to touch her, but his proximity was a physical weight. "I have no use for a woman's dress size," he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously soft. "I care about loyalty. I care about intellect. David Rossi is a fool who measures worth by the shallow standards of a world that I own. Fools don't survive long in my city." He tossed the half-smoked cigarette onto the wet pavement and crushed it beneath his leather shoe. He looked back at the idling SUV, then back down at Clara. "You have 2 choices, Clara." Artan said, his tone shifting into pure business, yet underlaid with something strangely protective. "You can sit here freeze to death and let a man who isn't worth the mud on my shoes win. Or you can get in my car." Clara stared at him. "Get in your car and go where? To a warm hotel, to a hot meal, and tomorrow to a new life, where your mind is respected, your loyalty is rewarded, and your husband learns exactly what happens when you discard something valuable that belongs to Artan Costello." Belongs to. The words sent an involuntary shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. It was a terrifying proposition. He was a criminal, a Mafia boss. Entering his world meant crossing a line she could never uncross. But as she looked down at her soaked, ruined sneakers, and then back up at the warm, dark interior of the Lincoln Navigator, she realized she had already lost the good world. The legitimate world had chewed her up, used her labor, drained her love, and left her out for the garbage collectors. Artan held out his hand. It was a large, calloused hand, wearing a heavy gold signet ring. "Come with me," he commanded softly. Clara took a deep breath, clutching the edges of his cashmere coat. Slowly, heavily, she pushed herself up from the metal bench. She ignored her duffel bag on the ground. She didn't need those wet clothes anymore. She placed her cold, trembling hand into his large, warm one. Artan's grip was firm, supportive. He didn't struggle or act burdened as he helped her steady herself on the slippery pavement. He guided her to the SUV, the large bodyguard holding the umbrella, steady over them both. As Clara climbed into the back of the Navigator, sinking into the plush, heated leather seats, she felt a profound shift in the universe. The doors closed, sealing out the howling wind, the freezing rain, and the pathetic ghost of Clara Rossi. Artan slid in beside her. He tapped the partition. "Drive Bruno," he said. "Take us to the penthouse." The SUV pulled away from the curb, smoothly leaving the dark, cold suburb behind. Clara sat in the silence, the luxurious warmth seeping into her frozen bones. Artan opened a small crystal decanter, built into the center console, and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a glass. He handed it to her. "Drink," he ordered gently. "It will stop the shaking." Clara took a sip. The bourbon was smooth, burning a fiery welcome trail down her throat. She looked at the man sitting beside her, the Mafia boss who had just saved her life. "Why do you really need me?" she asked, her voice steadier now. Artan looked at her, the streetlights passing outside, casting rhythmic shadows across his face. "Because someone within my own family is stealing from me, Clara. They are using the very ledgers you audited. I need an accountant who is smarter than my enemies, and someone who has absolutely no ties to my world." He paused, his dark eyes locking onto hers, lingering for a fraction of a second on her lips before meeting her gaze again. "And because I protect what is mine. Welcome to the Costello Syndicate." Clara woke up the next morning, not on a frozen bus bench, but in the sprawling master guest suite of a penthouse overlooking the Houston skyline. The storm had broken, leaving a crisp, brilliant morning in its wake. On the foot of the king-sized bed sat 3 large boxes from a high-end boutique on the magnificent Mile. Inside were tailored silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, and bespoke wool trousers, all meticulously sized for her 280-pound frame. Artan Costello had not sent her a treadmill or a passive-aggressive diet book. He had sent a tailor's measurements to the best clothiers in the city. When she finally emerged, dressed in a sharp, emerald-green silk blouse and black trousers that draped flawlessly, she found Artan at a massive mahogany dining table spread with financial documents. He looked up, his dark eyes taking her in. He didn't make a crude comment or offer a patronizing compliment. He simply nodded, pulling out a chair beside him. "You look ready to work, Clara. Have a seat." Over the next 3 weeks, Clara's life underwent a seismic shift. The woman who had cowered under David's verbal abuse vanished, replaced by the brilliant financial architect she was always meant to be. Artan gave her unfettered access to the Costello Syndicate's sprawling network of legitimate businesses and illicit cash flows. He gave her a secure server, unlimited coffee, and absolute autonomy. She wasn't treated as a secretary or a burden. She was Artan's secret weapon. "They're using a fractional reserve mirroring technique," Clara explained one late evening, pointing to a labyrinth of highlighted spreadsheet rows. Artan stood behind her chair, his sheer proximity sending a now familiar rush of heat through her chest. "Someone on the inside is slicing micro-percentages off the top of your casino revenues and routing them through a mid-level corporate asset management firm. It's brilliant, honestly. By the time the money hits the shell companies in Panama, it looks like standard corporate dividends." Artan leaned closer, his hand resting casually on the back of her chair. "Do you have a name?" "I have 2, Clara said, her voice steadying despite the adrenaline. She tapped the screen. The internal authorization codes belong to your underboss Dominic Gallo. Artan's jaw tightened. A cold, terrifying silence filled the penthouse. Dominic had been his right hand for a decade. And the second name? Clara swallowed hard, pulling up a secondary document. She had stared at it for an hour before Artan walked in her mind, reeling from the bitter irony of the universe. The external asset management firm laundering Dominic's stolen money is Meridian Financial. Specifically, the accounts are being signed off by their newly appointed regional director. Artan's eyes narrowed as he read the name on the screen. David Rossi. The silence stretched. Artan looked from the monitor to Clara, reading the storm of emotions in her eyes. Your husband. Ex-husband. Clara corrected her voice, trembling with a mixture of shock and long-dormant rage. He got his promotion 3 weeks ago, the exact same time these massive authorizations started pushing through. David isn't a criminal mastermind, Artan. He's an arrogant, ambitious fool. Dominic Gallo is using him as a blind mule, and David is too busy enjoying the perks to look at the ledgers he's rubber-stamping. Artan walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the glittering grid of Houston. When he finally turned back, the look in his eyes was lethal, yet specifically protective when it landed on her. Dominic will be handled by me, Artan said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. But David belongs to you. How do you want to play this? Clara. For the first time in her life, Clara held the power of absolute destruction in her hands. She thought of the freezing sleet. She thought of the duffel bag in the puddle. She thought of Chloe's smirking face. Clara stood up. She was still a large woman, taking up space, but she no longer wanted to shrink. She carried her weight now, not as a burden, but as an anchor. I don't want him dead, Artan, Clara said firmly. Death is too quick. David loves his status. He loves his money, his tailored suits, and his pristine reputation. I want to take it all. I want him to know exactly who dismantled his life. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Artan's face. He crossed the room, stopping mere inches from her. He reached out his knuckles, gently brushing against her cheek. Then we dismantle him together, Maya Regina. Friday night at Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse on Rush Street was reserved for Houston's elite. It was a loud, opulent symphony of clinking, crystal-expensive steaks and corporate posturing. David Rossi sat at a prime center table, sipping a $50 glass of Cabernet, basking in his new reality. Across from him, Chloe was laughing at a joke he'd made her tiny frame, draped in a designer dress, paid for by his new regional director salary. Life was perfect. Shedding Clara had been the best career move he'd ever made, so the VP said if I keep these quarterlies up, we'll be looking at a house in Winnetka. By spring, David boasted, slicing into his ribeye. That's amazing, baby, Chloe cooed, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. Then, the ambient noise in the restaurant subtly shifted. The frantic energy dipped, replaced by a tense, nervous murmur. The maitre d' practically tripped over himself, rushing toward the entrance. David glanced up, annoyed by the interruption. His breath hitched in his throat. Walking into the dining room was Artan Costello. David knew the face from whispered warnings in the financial district. Costello was a man you never wanted to share a room with, let alone a ledger. He exuded raw, terrifying power, dressed in a midnight blue suit, his presence commanding absolute submission from the room. But it wasn't Artan that made David drop his steak knife. It was the woman on his arm. Clara walked through the tables with her head held high. She wore a stunning, custom-tailored crimson wrap dress that commanded attention. She was big-bowled and entirely unapologetic. Her hair was styled in sleek waves, and her lips were painted a sharp, confident red. She didn't look like the broken, weeping woman he had locked out in the rain. She looked like royalty. David's mind short-circuited. Clara, with Artan Costello. Artan guided Clara directly toward David's table. The two bodyguards flanking them stopped a few feet away, crossing their arms. "David," Clara said, her voice cool and carrying perfectly over the quiet dining room. David scrambled to stand up, his napkin falling to the floor. Chloe looked frantically between them. "Clara, what the hell is going on? How did you get in here?" "I own the restaurant," David, Artan answered for her. His voice deadpan. He pulled out a chair for Clara, who sat down gracefully, completely ignoring Chloe. Artan remained standing, a dark sentinel at her shoulder. "You're Artan Costello," David stammered, his arrogant veneer cracking, instantly sweat beading on his forehead. I don't understand." "My associate here," Artan gestured to Clara, "has been reviewing the Meridian financial portfolios, specifically the accounts you've been approving for the past month." David turned ashen. I just signed the authorizations. The client brings the money in." "The client is Dominic Gallo," Clara interrupted, leaning forward, her eyes locking onto David's terrified face. "He's been stealing from Mr. Costello and using your signature to wash the funds. You didn't do your due diligence, David. You saw the bonuses you wanted to impress your little girlfriend, and you signed off on $30 million of stolen Mafia money." Chloe gasped, shrinking back in her chair. "No, no, no," David pleaded, his voice cracking, looking desperately at Artan. "Mr. Costello, I swear to God I didn't know. I didn't know it was your money. I can fix it. Let me fix it." "You can't fix it, David," Clara said softly, a devastating smile playing on her lips. She reached into a crimson clutch and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. She dropped it on the white linen tablecloth. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. "What is that?" David whispered. "That is a heavily documented, completely traceable portfolio of your signature authorizing federal money laundering," Clara stated. "I spent the afternoon forwarding copies to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, the FBI Field Office, and the CEO of Meridian Financial. Mr. Costello's assets have already been cleanly insulated and routed elsewhere. But your name is on every single dirty dime left at the scene of the crime." David fell back into his chair, the blood draining from his face entirely. "The feds, Clara, they'll give me 20 years. My career, my life, you're destroying me. You threw me in the garbage, David," Clara said, her voice dropping to a fierce, icy register. "You told me I was useless. You told me I was nothing but a fat embarrassment. But it turns out my brain is worth more than your entire existence. I didn't destroy you. I just let you destroy yourself." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, echoing off the concrete canyons of Rush Street. Artan placed a proprietary gentle hand on Clara's shoulder. He looked down at the ruined, pathetic man sweating at the table. "You had a queen in your house, David," Artan said coldly, "and you treated her like a pawn. Enjoy federal prison." Artan offered his hand to Clara. She took it, rising gracefully from the table. She didn't look back at David as he buried his face in his hands, nor at Chloe, who was already inching out of her chair to distance herself from the doomed man. As they walked out into the cool Houston night, the flashing red and blue lights of federal cruisers pulling up to the restaurant illuminated the street. Artan turned to her, pulling her close against his side. "How do you feel, Clara?" She looked up at the man who had seen her worth when she was at her lowest, who had handed her the tools to reclaim her empire. She was heavy, she was brilliant, and she was deeply, irrevocably loved by the most dangerous man in the city. "I feel light," Clara smiled, resting her head against his chest. "Take me home." If Clara's incredible journey of reclaiming her power and proving that true worth comes from within gave you chills, you are not alone. Don't let society or toxic partners dictate your value. Hit that like button if you loved seeing David get exactly what he deserved. Share this story to empower someone who needs a reminder of their own brilliance, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more dramatic, real-life revenge stories that will leave you breathless